Now, in other news revolving our crisis in power, Eskom wants to adopt a new payment structure. It will see you paying before you even use any electricity. The utility says this will ultimately lower the cost of power. It also wants to review subsidies to homes in certain areas. Let's discuss some of the ramifications now with Nato Oosthuizen from the Renewable Energy. He is a renewable energy expert, rather, from BDO SA. Thank you so much for your time. Again, you'll hear South African eyes rolling across the country. First with news that we're headed for a power cut tonight, but straight on the back of that news that Eskom has put forward other ways to try and get more money out of us. It seems that the focus here is that they want us to pay more money for using electricity at peak hours. What is your understanding of what they've put on the table?
Well, I think, as they say themselves, is they're trying to be more relevant. The pricing structure that they've got in place at the moment is like an old telecom system. And I like to compare electricity and where we find ourselves currently to what we had in telecoms back in the day. I mean, when telecommunications started, you had a very basic structure of how pricing would work. And then the guys realized that to be more competitive and more relevant, they need to speak to the needs of the user. In this case, I think that the users themselves has become more educated in how to use power and how to get around the system and use the Eskom system to their advantage, combining grid usage and Eskom usage. And I think what Eskom is trying to do here is to basically stop that and say, you know what, guys, if you're going to use our grid and you're going to use peak power, we need to make sure that we get our money for it, and that effectively clients can't buy cheaper power and use that during peak times, especially with the inclining block tariff that the guys use for private sector.
Now, I think you'd agree that there's been a major breakdown in trust between the power-using public and the power utility Eskom. If this proposal is put into place, we don't know when and we don't know by how much those tariffs would be increased by. How would Eskom go about making sure people understand that they can trust that if they're using power at certain times, that is the power that they're paying more for? Or if people then decide, right, if they're charging me more for using power between 5 p.m. and 8 p.m., I'm just going to cut how much power I use, so therefore I shouldn't be paying more for electricity. How are they going to go about ensuring that people trust that they're being charged for their usage at those particular times of the day?
Well, my honest opinion, I'm not sure whether they go for the trust angle. I think that they're developing a system that makes sure that they're getting the money that's due to them with minimal consumer intervention. Basically, if you're going to go on the grid, whether you only have access to power, whether you use power, they're going to charge you for each and every element. So based on that aspect is if you're locked into the grid, there's certain minimum charges that you will have. And the only controllable will be your usage, and hopefully that will be communicated well to the consumers. But I do trust that the consumers are also educated and that they will look at the structure and ultimately with the more intelligent consumers, the guys would look at how to best benefit from the new structure that has been implemented.
Where does this leave? Obviously, a lot of these suggestions put on the table, proposals put on the table by Eskom, there's a large focus on residential customers. But you and I both know that our big power users are actually the ones, firstly, that keep the economy going, but are also putting a lot of pressure on our power grid as well. Where do any of these proposals put on the table by Eskom, where does it leave our big power users going forward?
I think the big power users will definitely have to do introspection. And for a lot of those guys, and what I see in industry as well, is that those users are also looking to start developing their own infrastructure with the new rules that government has put into place to say that you can self-generate. I think a lot of those big users are actually looking at those opportunities because I think they do understand as the rules of the game change at Eskom, those bigger users will probably have to pay more of the bill for sustaining the infrastructure that is currently outdated. And I think they trust themselves a bit better than the Eskom the Eskom-led government institution to actually do that. And I think they can do it more affordable. So that's the move I see in market, where the big users are actually looking to self-generation and see how that can be more sustainable for them.
From what you've seen of these new proposals, do you think that Eskom is opening itself up to be a little bit more agile when it comes to residential consumers who have now gone the route of renewable energy using solar panels or batteries and all of these different options that we've now become more used to hearing about? Do you think they're a little bit more open to that and seeing how they can make space for these customers that are now looking at alternative means of powering their day-to-day lives?
I do think so, yes. I think the pricing model that they are implementing do speak to the variables that come with self-generation on a residential level. I do think some of the benefits that some of the consumers and households used with the grid tying system and with solar generation will probably fade away with the implementation of the new pricing structure. For example, we all know that most of our electricity that we use is during, at home, is usually during peak hours, between the time of 5 to 10 at night or then early mornings. So what guys with solar systems would do is, and being grid tied, the guys would generate power throughout the day where sunlight is available. They would push that electricity into the grid, and then they will use that electricity during peak time. Now that's actually a positive for the consumer, because ultimately the peak time electricity is much more expensive to generate. Or if you're using inclining block tariff, so for instance, when you go to your local electricity provider and you pay for prepaid electricity, you'll see that they charge you per block of electricity that you use. So the guys using solar would go and buy the cheaper blocks, a minimum part of it. They will charge their batteries throughout the day, and they will use only electricity during peak time at a cheaper rate. And that's exactly what Eskom is trying to stop, is to say, well, if you're using electricity during peak times and you're tied into the grid at that point, you're going to pay peak prices for it. So I think they're trying to sell it that it's a positive, and it is definitely something that needs to happen to be more reflective of what you are using. But I do think for some of the consumers that might lead to the calculation that they did initially on the affordability of their solar system ever so slightly changing. And that might be an interesting factor to consider when installing solar at your home.
Now, just in closing, as a layperson looking at some of these proposals put on the table, it does seem like they're trying to put the choice and the ball in the court of the consumer. But it's going to take some time for people to wrap their brain around what these options may be, if, of course, NERSA gives the go-ahead and they do roll it out. Education is going to be key here, isn't it? So that people understand completely what they're signing up for and what power they have and how much what power they have in choice, and what that could potentially cost their household going forward. So in a way, yes, it's a good thing, but it's going to come with quite a bit of responsibility and much needed education.
I agree with that. Sorry, I'm going to use the telecoms example again, but if we think back 30 years, there were basic landlines. You picked up the phone, you just got your telephone bill at the end of the month and you paid whatever they said. But if you think about where we are now with telecoms, people are very educated with what they pay per gigabyte or megabyte, what off-peak or on-peak from the minutes, how they basically communicate, whether it's via data or whether it's via VoIP or via normal landline. People become educated when they are interested, and there's more options in the market. I think Eskom do have the responsibility to educate and market their packages and the way they're going to bill the people so the people can better understand it. And I do think actually, and I've said it in a previous interview, is that I do think that there's a definite big market for privatization of this rollout of a new strategy in selling of electricity. Just like when Telkom basically went over and the industry opened up for telecommunications. There's a private sector out there that can better potentially package the solution to the consumer, better meet the needs of the consumer, but still generate sufficient revenue for Eskom to sustain the infrastructure. I really do think that the opportunity needs to be granted to private sector to actually also be part of the solution when going to market and meeting the needs of the consumer. One cannot help but feel that Eskom is kind of writing the rules as to what they want the market to look like, and not giving the opportunity to the consumer, which is actually the ultimate client, to decide what they want and how they want to use it, and whether the market, being Eskom or any other private IPP, can provide to them. And I would like to see that being developed a bit better and being discussed by Eskom a bit more.
Okay, lots of conversations I think we'll continue to have based on these new proposals set forward by Eskom. So we thank him for his time. That was Nato Oosthuizen on Eskom's new tariff plan joining us there. He is the renewable energy expert from BDO SA. We thank him for his time this evening. On to